the cup and the league all to be won. Everyone knows there's a job to be done, and with a team so fine, I'm proud they're mine. We'll be singing the song. For real bars from Birmingham Athletic, and now we are on song. For real bars from Birmingham Athletic, and we'll go marching on.
The Dunfermline Athletic Former Players Association podcast is sponsored by Starnut Apparel. Affordable and stylish clothing born on the terraces. Listeners of this podcast can get 10% off their order by using code PODCAST at the checkout. Just head to www.starnutapparel.co.uk.
Before we get into this latest episode, we would like to thank everyone who's purchased a ticket for our first ever Captain's Brunch, which will take place on the 22nd of October at the KDM Group East End Park. The event sold out in just 24 hours, and it promises to be a fantastic afternoon. So far, we can confirm former captains attending the brunch will include 1968 Scottish Cup winning captain Roy Barry, Scott Nipper Thompson, Greg Shields, Andy Geoghegan and Callum Morris. We have another exciting event lined up for early 2024, so please keep an eye out for that one also. On to this month's episode. And as a former captain who sadly can't attend the brunch as he's going on holiday, however, we've managed to secure him on this episode of the podcast to hear all about his career in the game and playing for the club he supported as a boy. Signing for the club in 1977, Bobby Robertson would become a club legend, who helped guide the club from the second division to the Premier League in successive seasons. He served the club as a player for 11 seasons of that, and only one player, Norrie McCarthy, made more league appearances for the Pars. Not only did he serve the club as a player, he would become club doctor in 2007 for 10 seasons. So sit back, relax and get ready to walk down the Halbeath Road with Bobby Robertson.
Bobby, thanks for your time this morning. It's great to catch up with you as always. How's life treating you?
Well, thanks for asking me, Mikey, which is very, very kind. Life is good. I fully retired from my medical job last August, so I've had a year of retirement, which has been, really full and rewarding, and it's a great job.
Do you miss working, or are you quite happy in retirement?
I'm happy now. I think I sort of cut my hours a wee bit back in 2018, so I sort of I eased myself into retirement. I still do, I did a bit of teaching latterly, so I still touch on that a wee bit. But time was right. We'd gone through COVID, and COVID had been. I had cut my hours sort of just prior to that, but then COVID meant that everyone really, had to help out. So I got more involved. I was involved in the vaccination programme through this part of the county. And then after that, my wife and I had always, we loved travelling. And my wife was a GP as well. And one of our hopes was that, once we retired, we'd been very busy through life, too much to travel as much as we wanted. And we wanted to really get on the road and see the world. And then, of course, that was halted by COVID, but since that we've what we like we like to go to sort of far-flung places, and we do what's called posh backpacking. So we just organise our travels ourselves, and if we hit upon a difficult situation, we've got a wee bit of money now that we can always bail ourselves out.
Yeah.
So it's been good. It's been a very busy year. I'm a keen golfer. I'm involved at the golf club at Ladybank, and I keep fit, I cycle, I run, so
Keeping busy. Brilliant, mate. We'll rewind right back to the start. So you were born in Leslie in February 1959. So what was early years like for a young Bobby Robertson?
Well, we moved when I was age 4 through to Glenrothes. So all my schooling, I went to Warrout Primary School and Community High School. I was sports daft all my life, really. Not just football. I played tennis, I ran, I played golf, but football was probably, my main interest growing up. My father was a great Pars fan, so I'd been Pars since I was old enough to remember.
I was going to ask that, because obviously staying in Glenrothes, you're not in Dunfermline, so how come you were a Dunfermline supporter?
Well, my dad was born and brought up in Alloa,
Right.
And he was an Alloa fan. He played football himself. At junior level. He was an Alloa fan, but then moved through to when we got married, moved through to this part of Fife, and it was at the time that Dunfermline were, having their greatest ever decade.
Yeah. The halcyon days of the 60s.
Oh yeah, so he was, he was a big Pars man by the time I came along, and I went regularly, as I say. He took me regularly since about the age of 5. We were at the Scotch Cup final. I was age 9 in '68. I remember that more than I remember any game I ever played.
Wow.
The whole day, the match, the goals, I can remember it clearly. I remember the drive back through Kincardine and folk lining the streets. And a slightly interesting adjunct to that is, well, I was 9 when I went to that cup final, and I've got 3 kids, and my youngest, Ali, was 9 when we got to the cup final against Celtic.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a mirror there.
Unfortunately, the result wasn't as
Wasn't
good,
the same, no.
Who was your hero? Who's your football hero when you're growing up?
They were all Pars men. I mean, it's quite surreal that I'm quite friendly with Roy Barry now, because Roy was my hero.
Yeah.
I mean, he epitomised everything that, that in my eyes, a real footballer was. He was a hard player, a winner, and he led, the best Dunfermline team I ever saw.
Yeah.
So Roy, Barry Mitchell, had a bit of flair. Willie Callahan, what a fullback Willie was. Bert Payton, just class.
Proper legends, eh?
Bert was a player ahead of his time, I think. He was one of these guys who could just glide into space. He had a lovely first touch. He had great vision. They were my idols.
Brilliant. Any of the European games, did you go to them?
Yeah. And I remember the one that sticks most vividly in my mind is the Slovan-Bratislava match. And a guy, his name, Jan Kapkovic, I think his name was. I mean, they stole that from us, really. And yeah, I mean, I remember teams came to East End, and we were expected to thump them. You expected to beat them. Teams now that are competing in the top European competitions, and we didn't have really much doubt that we would beat these sides.
What
so
an
it was
era,
wonderful.
What an era to be a supporter.
Oh, it was fabulous. It was
magic.
It was great. I was just so lucky, that we had that magnificent decade.
Yeah.
Really.
So was it your dream to play for Dunfermline? What was your kind of pathway then?
Yeah. So I suppose up until I was about 13, 14, I wanted to be a footballer. I played, obviously, school team, sort of representative school football. And then about 14, 15, things probably maybe changed a wee bit for me. I was doing quite well at school. I remember my father was really sick and was in hospital and had to have a big operation. And I remember spending, going down to the hospital to see him. And I thought, the work that the nurses and the doctors were doing was really, really quite inspiring. And I sort of changed at that point. I began to think about, I think I would quite like to be a doctor. So 14, 15, that became, I think, my main ambition. My football was going okay. I was playing the big juvenile team in this part of Fife were Leaving Royals, and there's Dunfermline United and on the other side of the county. But all the sort of better players here sort of went to Leaving Royals, with players like, a school pal of mine was a lad called Alan Hunter.
Right.
And Alan was a super player. He'd signed for Dunfermline and played a season or two. He was there. Maurice Malpass played down there. A guy, Kenny Halley, who went down to Nottingham Forest. Two or three guys that went to play for East Fife. So it was a feeding team at that time for Aston Villa.
Right.
So the Royals attracted, a lot of good players. So I was playing for Leaving Royals. It was in the days where you played for your school team on the Saturday morning, and then you went and played for your juvenile team in the afternoon. And around that time, it was quite difficult for me, because I was getting a little bit of success. There were some senior clubs showing interest. I was academically still doing fine and passing exams, and so the prospect of being a doctor was still very much there. So I had 2 or 3 years where I think it might have gone either way, really.
Were you at a crossroads at any point at that age to think, right, either do my studying now or play football? Yeah, I mean, there was, when I was about 16, there was some interest that we had one of the teachers at our school was a guy called John Ferguson at our community, and John had been a player. He played for Oldham. He contracted TB and it ended his football career, but he became a scout for Manchester City. And John used to take a team, our school team, down to Manchester. We did it 2 Easter holidays. And the first Easter holiday we went down, at the end of that, Manchester City weren't the Manchester City they are now. They're very much the second team in Manchester then. But there was a bit of interest shown by City, and I was asked to go down a couple of times more, once in the autumn and the following spring. And at that second time I went down, there was sort of, I wasn't offered any contract, but they were discussing with me, if you came here, the educational opportunities would be X, Y, and Z, because I had mentioned, that I was planning to take my hires. So they said that you could go to Manchester Polytechnic, and they offered or mentioned a number of courses that were available. But I really wanted to do medicine, and that wasn't an option. There was a wee bit of interest from Hearts, and there was a wee bit of interest from Dundee United. But that was really when I didn't want to commit to that. Yeah. And then Dunfermline were interested, and I signed an S form. George Miller was and I thought that left my options open. I could. It wasn't a commitment one way or the other, but it put me in touch, and it was my team. I was going to say, what did that feel like when Dunfermline offered you that YTS contract? Well, it wasn't hard to say to do. I mean, that swung it completely, really, and that was probably the pivotal moment in me deciding that I was going to, pursue a career in medicine, because at that time Dunfermline, were part time, so it fitted the bill, and so at the end of the S form period, Harry was manager. And I remember my father loved Harry Melrose, and I remember Harry coming to our school, and I think I was in 6th year at the time, and it was the time where I moved from being S form to there was a provisional signing. I don't know if they still have these. I don't think they will, but it was what that meant was I got paid a wee bit. I could play for the reserves, because the reserves had midweek matches. Yeah. At that time, I'd gone on the Pars had the usual pathway at that time was you would sign for a junior team and get hardened up. Yeah. So I'd been moved from Leaving Royals to Kirkcaldy YM, and Harry came and we discussed the signing of the provisional contract to school, and I remember he sort of sold it to my dad, really, and they passed the papers over. My father signed it, and Harry said, "No, Mr. Robertson, it's your son." Yes, this. So anyway, so that happened, and we had this provisional year where I played a lot of reserve football with
heroes of mine. So I remember playing Stirling Albion one night, and Ken Mackey was playing Dave McNichol, Graham Shaw, I think.
Was that
Jim
quite surreal for
Scott.
you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was just
Playing at East End Park as well.
yeah. It was fantastic. It was going from really just being a supporter to suddenly putting the jersey on and going out with these guys. It was just a wonderful experience, really. That season, I think that was 76, 77.
Yeah. You mentioned him earlier, George Miller. He obviously signed you. What was George like?
A very little recollection of George. I mean, I was he was obviously involved with the first team, and signing a 15, 16-year-old was a minor part of his task. I didn't really have much to do. He was quite a stern figure. I'd not really got any great memories of George.
And then Harry comes in, who you mentioned. What was Harry like?
Oh, just a great guy. Just loved Harry as a manager, and he really bent over backwards to try and make. He knew some medical thing. One of the things he did, which was just a masterstroke, really, was when there was a couple of offers, and but I was pretty set on Dunfermline. When Harry brought Hugh White along to a meeting with my dad, and Hugh had moved from Hibs. He was a fourth-year medical student at the time. He'd moved from Hibs to Dunfermline. He'd signed the season that season before, and Hugh came and sat down and just explained how things had been for him. He'd been with a full-time club, and the pressures on him to go full-time meant that he was his fourth year. He had 2 more years to go in medical school, and Hibs wanted him to go full-time, and so he left there and came to Dunfermline, and he had been able to combine being a medical student at Edinburgh, playing first-team football for Dunfermline, and that was then a path I could see that could work for me.
It must have been great for you having someone that you could constantly have a chat to who's in a similar position, similar career path.
Yeah,
that must have been good having that in the dressing room.
And Hugh was a mentor to me in so many ways. He was 5 years ahead of me in football, 5 years ahead of me in medicine, looked after me, encouraged me. One of the great influences in my life, Hugh.
Brilliant. So 8 days after you signed your pro contract, you made your debut. Do you remember much about your debut?
Was that East Fife?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember much about that?
I remember I'd never been so tired in my life. I was at East End. I was still living at home in Alexander Road in Glenrothes. My dad took me to the game, and it was just a complete, a big step up. And I'd really only been training, we used to train twice a week at that time. It was Tuesday night and a Thursday night. And I think I was 17, I think I was.
Yeah.
The game was a bit of a blur, but I can just remember being so exhausted at the end of it. But I think we won.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I've not got that here. It was in the Fife Cup.
Fife Cup, yeah.
And that same season, we spoke about it off mic, but Kenny Dalglish last game for Celtic before he moved to Liverpool. You played against him that day. What was that experience like?
That was amazing. There had been so I think it was a pre-season friendly. I think. I mean, just gone from playing junior football with Kirkcaldy YM, suddenly facing Glasgow Celtic, and there was quite a bit of hype about it because Liverpool had, I think that there was an assumption that he was moving, and I just sort of said that I remember being given a role really to to mark him, and so I thought I'd done my job. We lost 4-1. I thought I'd done my job really well because Kenny hadn't scored, but then Harry just pointed out after the game. He didn't score, son, but he took you out of position 4 times to allow Johannes Edvaldsson, and he scored a couple, and I can't remember who scored the others, but that was a wee bit of a lesson.
Yeah.
How fantastic Dalglish was. He could control the game, and his positional sense was amazing. He would just, without knowing it, just take you 3 or 4 yards, leave a wee hole behind you.
Yeah.
But that was wonderful. It's a great privilege to see you've been on the park with Kenny Dalglish.
Definitely. Who else were you coming up against at that kind of time, opposition-wise?
Well, I mean, there were some great players in the Scottish League. I mean, I can remember playing Clyde, and Clyde had Pat Nevin and Steve Archibald. Craig Brown was their manager at the time. And I remember playing, we were at Shawfield, and Nevin really was a fabulous player. And he'd been giving me the slip all day. I remember having him. I thought, I've got you this time. He was right against the corner flag, and he was facing the corner flag. I had him boxed in, and then he wasn't there. And he'd sort of backheeled it through my legs and spun me, and I was just looking at the corner flag. Nevin, he was a standout.
Yeah.
That season, if I remember correctly, we also played Rangers in a League Cup match. So again, that first season, I remember the first match was at Ibrox on a Wednesday night, and I had a pathology tutorial that I had to be at. I just couldn't skip it. This is my first year at Edinburgh Uni, and it was at 2:00 on the Wednesday afternoon. And I remember thinking that, it was supposed to go on for an hour, and it was going on for an hour and a half, and I eventually had to say the tutor, excuse me, I'm playing Ibrox tonight, which he thought was just a wind up, but he eventually understood I was. So I got to nip off, but so I drove myself to Ibrox. The guys had gone for a pre-match meal. I missed it because I was my medical things, and so I got to Ibrox. I'd been given, when I nipped off early, all this stuff I had to revise, for the next day. So I remember going into the dressing room, the guys hadn't even been there, and getting the medical books out and sitting, reading, some things I had to swat up for the next day. So on that occasion,
yeah.
I mean, that was probably even more surreal than the Kenny Dalglish experience as the first season, because they had, Peter McCloy, Davy Cooper, Tam Forsyth, John Gregg, Alec MacDonald, Derek Parley, and Derek Johnson.
Yeah. Basically the European Cup winning team.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I remember being, Tom Forsyth had this fierce reputation, and he went through me after about 3 minutes. You just, there was a 50-50, and he just absolutely slaughtered me. So welcome to the big boys game. But that was a funny wee incident on that game. Is we had obviously we had a big win bonus, but we had this. Harry had negotiated a bonus, 100 quid, which was a lot of money in 1977. 100 quid, particularly for a medical student, impoverished medical student. If we kept the score to 3 goals, because they thought that would have a big, get us a big crowd back at East End, because it was a 2-leg thing. And we were getting beat 3-0, and Jimmy Mullen, who played up front for us at that time, nicked a goal with like 5 minutes to go or something to get it 3-1, and we all went berserk. I think you're getting beat 3-1, guys. What's the fuss?
£100, thanks.
So £100, yeah. God, that was brilliant. And then we went back. We lost 3-1 at East End as well. But yeah, that first season. When I suppose I was expecting, to be playing. We were in the 2nd division, expecting to play against these Stirlings and Stenhousemuirs to get a game against Celtic and Rangers in your first year. Made me grow up quick.
What was the club like at that point? Because obviously they'd gone from the period in the 60s where they were flying, and then all of a sudden it was part-time football, lower leagues of Scottish football, low crowds. What was it like around the place at the time? Low expectations and
There were low, yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever got low expectations at Dunfermline, to be honest. You know, I mean, I think that period in the 60s and, early 70s raised the bar.
Yeah.
And, we knew that, we were part of an underachieving club, really. We were very aware of that. I always felt we were going to move upwards. Always felt that. And I mean, Harry, was a major player in that. He started. I know, Leash rightly gets credit, for taking the team, but I think Harry brought the club back. He brought pride back to the club. He was almost, it's always been a very important club to the community and to the fans. And I think, Harry started that recovery, really. I know we had, it took a few years, but I never at any time felt that was where we belonged, down there. You're only as good as where you are, I suppose, but yeah, we were always better than that. And you were given that sense that you're playing for Dunfermline Athletic, son,
Because Leash talks about a period when he first went in as manager and like the kits all had holes in them. And it was just like everyone was just so poor.
Well, there was no money.
So we need to change this.
Yeah, there was no money, and I think we were, in serious financial difficulty for a lot of that time. We the wages we were paying were, paltry, really. But I always felt that we could, because we were Dunfermline Athletic, we would attract better quality players, and then that began, to happen. If you've got a choice from the same money, I don't want to be disrespectful to any other clubs, but if you were given a choice, same money to play for Dunfermline Athletic or, another club at that same level, you would sign for Dunfermline. And we always had that edge. Still do, I think.
Brilliant. I think so. You scored your first goal that season. Do you remember who that was?
No. I never scored very many.
It was the 22nd of October 1977. And it was a header.
Meadowbank.
It was, Meadowbank.
Yeah.
It
was a header.
Against Meadowbank, yeah. You mentioned it earlier, so by this point, you started your studying. How did you balance studying, playing football, and just general, normal family life, I guess? How did you manage to do that?
I've always been a disciplined sort of guy. I worry if I don't feel I've prepared for everything. So I was so a typical week. We would be training on Tuesday, training on Thursday, playing on the Saturday. I would come back from training on Tuesday night, and I would just burn the midnight oil. I would get the books out, and I remember I was at Pollock Halls, at Edinburgh Uni for the first 2 years, and then I had a wee flat in Brunswick Street, and my window light on a Tuesday night and Thursday night would be on till 2-3 in the morning. I would catch up. I always felt you had to study. It was quite an intensive course, medicine. So your day was full with lectures and tutorials, etc. And then you had to sort of mug up all the reading around that. And so Tuesday and Thursday I made up for the hours I couldn't study in the evening by studying into the small hours. So I would do that Tuesday, Thursday. Friday, we used to finish at uni 4 o'clock. I was Mr. Boring. I would not go out on Friday night, which was fine, because I had the football. Friday night was a big study night for me. And then obviously Saturday was the football. I was very lucky in a way in my flat at uni, and the guys I shared with. One was a very good rugby player. He played for Boroughmuir. Another was a Scottish international hockey player.
Right.
So we were all big into our sport, and so we helped each other in that respect. So we would have a quiet Friday, we'd study. Saturday was football. Saturday night was a blowout night, and then Sunday, depending on how things were, I would probably spend a lot of that studying. So I wasn't the most exciting individual during that period. I also utilised every moment that I could. I mean, it was commonplace. We were travelling to away matches. I would just find a quiet space in the bus and get the books out. And when we'd had our sort of pre-match meal, I'd go back into the bus and do a wee bit of reading while the guys went off for a walk or to the bookies or whatever. So, but yeah, it was always a standing joke, that the doc would be up with the books studying. So I just had to make the most of my time, and that kept going. Once I qualified, really, I had to find time for my job as a junior hospital doctor, and you would often be. It wasn't uncommon that I would be up all night on a Friday night, working in the maternity hospital at Dunfermline or the old Dunfermline West Side Hospital, and then no sleep and just wander into East End and play. So,
how did you cope playing then? Surely you'd be exhausted, and did you find, could you switch back into concentration? This is football now. Or were you on the pitch at times thinking about your studying and a page you just read in one of your books? Or
No. When
you were able to just switch.
Yeah. I mean, when you're young, you have an amazing amount of energy.
Yeah.
and the adrenaline surge of a match takes care of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sometimes at training, you'd maybe feel, a weary, but a game. It's completely different. You're buzzing, your adrenaline surge is huge, and that takes you through that. So now I can honestly say that I began then. I didn't get too worried if I was on call and I didn't get any sleep, because I knew I would be okay. You'd be wiped out probably for the next day or two.
Yeah.
But as long as I was disciplined and I stuck to my routines, I managed to cope.
Brilliant. Well, the following season, 78, 79, like you said earlier, Harry starts to build those foundations. We get promotion. There's a famous game that season against Falkirk. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, I do remember that one. So we needed a draw. After, it was very early on, John Salton got injured, and I went back to centre half. When I played for Leaven Royals in Kirkcaldy, I was a forward. I never played ever in defence, ever. And it's completely different nowadays. Kids are coached to play positions, and I played up front. And then when I went to Kirkcaldy, I sort of moved back into midfield and up front. But I'd never ever played any position in defence. So, but I suppose it was my luck that I was quite versatile, and that's probably why I was lucky enough to play so many games, because if anything, in those days you only had two subs, and so to have a player on the pitch that you could switch about was quite useful. So I think I was lucky in that I fulfilled that role a lot of times. So yeah, I went back to centre half, and Kenny Thompson beside me, and Kenny just told me where to go and just attack everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an amazing game, and so much at stake, and so Kenny sort of spoon fed me through that, and then I think we lost a goal.
I think we went 1-0 down.
1-0 down. John Perry, I think, scored.
Yeah.
Who came to us at one point, and then we had a penalty in the major. Andy Rowland took the penalty. I couldn't watch it, and he slotted it. We had a wee reunion not all that long ago, and Andy, I got to know him because he became a postie in Glenrothes.
Right.
So I'd often be out on my house calls, and I'd see Andy, doing the rounds in his post van. When we saw him again, there was a reunion just at the end of last season of the 78.
Yeah, 78
team. And he's now 80 and fit as a fiddle. And we talked about that penalty.
Yeah.
And the goalkeeper, I can't remember who it was, but he said he had been at Dundee United.
Right.
And he said he knew he couldn't save a penalty for me. So he scored, and that was it. Yeah, got the point, and got our first promotion. Well, my first promotion.
What other players were at the club during that time?
And then, Mick Leonard, who'd signed from Sligo Rovers. Now let me think. Hughie obviously was in goals. Jim Bowie, John Salton, Kenny Thompson, Jim Scott. Scotty was a hard character. He was a player I'd admired when I used to go and watch Dunfermline. So Scotty was there. We'd signed. Paul Donnelly had signed at the same time as me. Sandy McNaughton, I said Sandy.
Nah, Sandy was there though, I think he was top goal scorer that season.
Sandy, he was a good player.
Yeah.
A very good player. He was a big signing for us.
Yeah.
They were the main guys I think that I remember.
Brilliant. So just after that, Harry goes. I think there's a period Andy Rowan's kind of caretaker manager, and then there's a couple of years with Pat Stanton and Forsyth coming out. It was really difficult. What was it like working under these two guys?
Well, they were both. I think the club, were attempting to lift the profile of Dunfermline again. So, previous two managers had close links. In fact, many previous managers had close links with Dunfermline. And this is a wee bit of a deviation for the club, appointing big names. Had no connection with Dunfermline, and I got on great with both of them. But they weren't Dunfermline men really. And Pat came. He played me every week. He was good for me. He made some. He brought Norrie. He made some big changes, but never really got great success. He was hugely respected by all the players. Maybe slightly aloof. He brought in George Stewart,
right,
who was the coach, who did most of the training ground work, but just never had success. And I think there was always a sense that it was a temporary step for him. I think he had been up to Aberdeen as a coach, came to Cowdenbeath and then us, but he was always, I think, destined for Hibs.
Yeah.
And then Tam was a lovely man. He was very much in the cliche. His bark was worse than his bite. He was quite a gentle guy, actually. He brought in Cammy Murray, who had been a coach at Motherwell. Cammy was very influential. But yeah, Tam was. I remember that funny story about Tam. He would come in and you could almost see it was an act. He would rage, and he came in one day and was sort of looking around the dressing room, and we'd had a couple of twins played for us, Bobby and Stuart Doyle at that time, and Tam came in and we're just about to go out training, and he's looking around the dressing room and he said, "Where's your brother? Where's your brother? It's time to get out. Get your kit on. It's time to get out." Speaking to Bobby, and Bobby said, "Well, boss, you freed him last week." Said, "Oh, so I did." And there was another time he was raging at Sandy McNaughton, because Sandy and Mick Leonard used to travel together, and saying to Sandy, "Where's Mick? We're out in the training ground in 5 minutes." And Sandy said, "Well, look at the weather, boss. He'll not be here tonight." And "What do you mean he'll not be here tonight?" It's because there's a wee bit of snow. Does he not like to train in the snow? He said, No, but he drives the gritting lorries. So
the joys of part-time football.
Yeah, and we had all sorts. We had painters, decorators, electricians, plumbers, gritting lorry drivers, teachers, a couple of doctors. It was
brilliant. So Dan Forsyth struggles as well, like Pat Stanton, and then Big Leash comes in.
Yeah.
So what was it like in the early days when Jim took over? Was it
still quite a difficult period, or did he start making quite a lot of changes early on? Or?
Well, it was difficult because where we were, but the atmosphere totally changed. There was a sense that we had somebody who cared about the club back in charge again. He was, he was quite an inspirational figure in the way he lifted the atmosphere in the dressing room, made it fun to be back playing and training again. But he also had a fierce determination to, that's something that is maybe missed a little bit. He was a real winner, Leash. He was clever, the way that he could get the best out of people. He was probably the first manager I played for who clearly, and I don't think he spent a lot of time thinking about this. I think it was just natural to him. He knew how to cajole a player. He knew, who needed a bit of encouragement, an arm round the shoulders, who needed the stick. And he had that, in his locker. And he certainly got the best out of what he had. But he was quite ruthless as well. He knew who wasn't good enough and who had to go. And then he implemented that, in the years, and that's why he got the success that he did.
People forget he was only 28 years old.
Oh, I know.
As well when he got that job. It's crazy to think.
I mean, I played with Leash, when I joined and was in that provisional year, and so I'd been around there when he was a player, and he did. It's funny when I suppose I was 5 or 6 years younger than him, but I never thought it was a surprise that he was the manager. It just seemed a fit, and even although he was 28, that he immediately had the respect of the dressing room, even players who were his age or older. So his age wasn't a handicap for him. But yeah, you look at it now, a 28-year-old, coming into the management of a club like Dunfermline is quite an achievement, really.
Big time, yeah.
We are Flow Digital Pharmacy, and we are proud to sponsor the Walking Down the Halbeath Road podcast. Our easy-to-use app is a convenient way to access your NHS prescription medication, and our team of trained pharmacists are helping thousands of people to access the support and medication they need. If you're registered with a GP who's based in England, you can use the Flow app to securely and conveniently send them NHS medication requests and arrange delivery to a location of your choice at a time that suits you. This means you can avoid the hassle of contacting your GP and making unnecessary round trips to eventually collect your prescription. Find out more at We Are Flow, spelled PHLO. That's weareflow.com.
The end of Jim's first season, 84-85, he makes you captain, you replace your pal Hugh White. What was that like? Obviously as a supporter. You just played for the club, you're now the captain.
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest single honour in my football career, really. Maybe even outside football, captaining my team, captaining the Pars. And it's something that I'll never get used to. It was a great honour, and it's I suppose it's different days in a way, in that we were part time, and I was working as something else that took up a huge amount of my energy, but yeah, that was a big thing. I was always be grateful to him for doing that.
What kind of captain were you? Were you someone that went round all the players, or a shouter, or?
No, I wasn't a shouter, really. I would. I could identify, I think, when people were struggling. So I would try. There were players you didn't need to say anything to. People, like McCarthy, Watson, who were, very confident people on the pitch, and you really didn't need to do much for them. But I think I was able to identify where players were struggling and could, help out with them. And I always tried to make a point of making sure that everybody could see that I didn't leave anything out on the pitch. That I tried to be a captain by example. I wasn't the most skillful of players, but I don't think anybody gave any more. I certainly, gave everything I had when I went out to play. And I think, leading by that sort of example on the park is an important thing, probably what I tried to do.
Yeah. Brilliant. During this time, you played, from 78 to 82, you played 154 consecutive games for the club without getting injured. And then the club starts to really progress with Jim. And you play across 3 different leagues in 3 successive seasons. So we start obviously getting the promotions. What was it like starting to see the club really progressing and starting to go up the leagues? Was there that belief we're going to get back to the Premier Division?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that when you're in a winning team, you really, there's a momentum that follows that, and there was a great confidence in the dressing room. We were essentially the same bunch of guys, that we were sort of talking about earlier. The plasterers, the plumbers, the sparkies, the van drivers, the same bunch of guys that went from the second to the first and from the first to the second. There were the first to the Premier. There were a few important additions, but the core of the team remained, and the momentum that we had that took us up into the from the second to the first was the most important thing. The confidence of winning regularly, that we trusted each other. That there are bonds of friendship made during these 2 seasons that have stayed with me, for the next 30 years. We had a fantastic team spirit. We had a great respect for each other, and we had this fierce competitive spirit. And we always had a belief, that we had match winners in our team. We were never down and out. I have never experienced a team spirit like that these 3 years. And I was so proud that these guys, most of them, although the team then, once we got up into the Premier League, it's a different level really. And we were the bag carriers. We'd done the job. And that team then had to be split. But I'm so proud of all these guys. I think they changed the future, I think, for Dunfermline. And, from
the
these
club back to where it should be.
Yeah, I mean, we were really down at a level that we should never have been, didn't belong. And that bunch of guys, they were the ones really that brought us back. And we've never really looked back. I know, we've had some terrible times, but the club have never really been as low on the playing side as they were way back in those days. Yeah.
Something, before we touch about the Premier League season, something I wanted to ask you about was the EastEnders record.
All right.
You were involved in all that. What was that experience like?
Well, no, I wasn't really involved in all that to a full extent. I was involved we were going through, Blair Morgan, I think, had and EastEnders was the sort of most popular television programme. Everyone knew the theme tune, and Blair put together slightly corny lyrics, but yeah. And then we went over to a studio in Edinburgh to record the song. So I'll play it to you later if you. I've still got the single. And then the guys, then we went to Pebble Mill down in Birmingham. Because Pebble Mill at 1 was, that was so corny. Pebble Mill at 1 was a big lunchtime telly programme, but fortunately I had to work.
Right.
So I made sure I was on call.
It was great publicity though at the time, wasn't it?
Huge.
Like the club were doing loads of good stuff like that off the park as well, weren't they?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's the sort of thing that lifted the profile nationally. But if anyone's got the single, listen to the B-side, because that's Gregor Abel's.
Yeah, the B-side's good. The B-side's good. So we get to the 87-88. You're in the Premier League. You have one season. How was that experience? Obviously, it was quite a tough season, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, we got relegated at the end of it, and we had some high moments. I'd started to get some injury problems. I had a really bad hamstring tear against St Mirren. I can't remember if it was the season before, or and it sort of all. I think after that, and I tore it again another twice. I never really got back to the speed and fitness levels that I'd had. So I felt in the Premier League season that. For me, with a combination of, because at that time I was working full time on call commitments as a doctor. I'd had these injury issues, and I was, although I mentioned earlier, my wife's a GP as well, and I sort of went full time training that year as best I could. So Linda would go in and would do my surgery in the morning. I would go, it was Eagle Glen we were at, and I would go into Eagle Glen training. And then I would have to rush back to do my house calls and my afternoon surgery. And I could only do that 3 days a week, and so I was missing a little bit of the full-time training. I always used to make sure I went in on a Friday, because I could put in the physical work myself. I would go training and on nights after work, but the sort of big sit down and tactical discussion about the game on the Saturday usually took place on the Friday, so I always made sure I was in on the Friday. But I have some wonderful memories of that season, but it was. The work made it really difficult for me to fully appreciate it. I played in quite a lot of games. I had some.
You played 22 games.
Yeah.
Well, 20 starts and 2 subs.
Right.
That season.
So I'm absolutely thrilled that I got an opportunity in my career to play in the Premier League. I don't think I was at my peak because of injury and work commitment, but I gave it my all, and I had some great memories of it. But it sort of convinced me that I wouldn't have wanted to be a full-time professional footballer. That routine wasn't for me really. And when I had when I had a poor game, I could console myself with the fact, well, you're really a doctor. And if I had a nightmare, at work, I could think, well, at least I'm a footballer. So it worked for me. Some wonderful memories of that. It was great. I think I ticked off all the grounds in Scotland I hadn't played at. And one of the memories I'll never forget is that the last game I played for the Pars was at Parkhead against Celtic. And it was that we were down, we were relegated by then, and I remember the Celtic fans giving us a fantastic. And Leash was, was very popular in the game nationally by then, and we had and I think we only lost 1-0.
Yeah, 1-0.
Yeah, and
Celtic I think lifted the trophy that day, didn't they?
Yeah, and what a way, to finish. I knew I was finishing then. I hadn't told the club. I just knew that I couldn't, due to work commitment, really commit to another season. So I knew that I was leaving, and I think it was after that I sort of said to Leash that. In fact, I think he he might have given me another year. I think he was but I said that's the end for me. I'm moving on.
See, by that point, obviously you're a qualified doctor. You're working in the Dunfermline area as well. You got any stories like, obviously you'd be speaking to supporters all the time. It must have been quite surreal for a supporter. Goes into the hospital and then the club doctor's one of his like his favourite players or whatever.
Yeah, no, that happened often. And my favourite story on that was I worked at Dunfermline Maternity Hospital, and we used to, if there were, the midwives would do the deliveries, but if there were any complicated deliveries, the doctor would get called in. And I remember getting, paged down to the delivery suite, and this poor woman was having a lot of difficulty delivering this rather large baby, and we had to use forceps to get the wee one out. So anyway, so you're all gowned up and gloved, etc. And I remember delivering the baby and handing the wee one to the dad. And it was quite a hairy delivery. Adrenaline was going, heart was racing. But when the wee one sort of screamed, and you think, job done. And it was boiling in the delivery suite. So after dad had the wee one, and mum was crying, and everything was great. And I took off my gown and my mask, and the dad was holding the baby and just sort of looked at me. Bobby Robertson. And I said, yeah. And he was holding the baby. He passed the baby to his mum, and he said, what about that game at East End last Saturday? So we had a 5-minute conversation, and this new father. It just shows you, what the football club means.
Amazing.
It means to people. So, and there was lots of folk, there would be games. I remember one day we were playing Hearts East End, and I was working in casualty, the A&E at the old Dunfermline and West Fife Hospital. And there was supposed to be a locum. And the club were quite good. If I couldn't get my wife to work, they would get some locum money, and I could employ it. So I had a locum coming at 1 o'clock, and they never turned up. And I couldn't leave the position. And I remember there was one of the consultants who sadly died now, a chap, Brian Dean. And Brian was in and about the hospital, and he saw me and he said, up the road for the game today. I said, well, my locum hasn't turned up. And he said, give me your bleep, son. Took the bleep from me and said, I'll work this afternoon. So the consultant just stayed in the unit to cover while I went to play. So, and I was a sort of a minor celebrity in the hospital setup because of the football.
Yeah.
And the staff, it was a novelty for them. They quite enjoyed it, and I got quite a few concessions out of work to go and play, and I would return the favour by some free tickets and stuff. But
superb.
That was a nice thing. That again, part of the how Dunfermline's a community club, and everyone liked to do what they could.
Yeah, they all stick together when everything's going good as well. Especially you see it at the moment, the crowd on Saturday, for example.
Oof.
There's a real togetherness again about the club, isn't there?
Oh,
it feels that anyway when you go.
No, there is, and it's. I think we have a good feel around the club just now. We've got the right manager in, and we've got the right, backroom staff. That's the fans know when they've got, somebody who, really appreciates working for Dunfermline.
Yeah.
And I think James does, and he comes across very well. So, but I mean, did you think of the people? When I went back as a doctor, the same folk were there that were there when I played. We've had such. I mean, look at the calibre of people that volunteer.
Yeah.
And have worked, at the club for decades.
So like you say though, the club means everything to
salt of the earth folk.
the people, yeah.
They really are. And you know, the people who make the club tick over all these decades, you know, people like Mo, you know, I mean, what a great guy Mo is. You know,
30-year service this year.
He's just a great man, you know, he's selfless, totally committed to the club. And before Mo, I mean, Joe, you know, Joe Nelson, Joe was like dad to me, really. You know, he was so, when I was a medical student, and Joe felt quite sorry for me, and he on Thursday nights, he would always bring a wee, so Barbara, his wife, was a fantastic baker, you know, there would be a carrot cake or, you know, I think he thought that I was a student and I couldn't afford to feed myself. and you know, Barbara would bake for me and bring me, and Joe just looked after me. And yeah, an amazing man.
Yeah, again, the club meant everything to him, didn't it?
Completely.
It was life.
Completely. And it's all of these people who give far more than, you know, you would be expected to in terms of fulfilling your contracts or your job or something. Yeah. And I've just mentioned two, but there are lists of people like that. Wonderful people at Dunfermline.
Yeah, brilliant. So by July 1988, you moved to Alloa Athletic.
Yeah.
So just before we touch on Alloa, how would you sum up your time at Dunfermline as a player?
I achieved everything and more than would make me happy, really. To play for your boyhood club is just fabulous. To have the success that we had was beyond my expectations, really. When I joined as a part-timer, I thought, you know, I would probably be playing in the lower reaches of Scottish football until Dunfermline moved up, and when Dunfermline moved up, I'd be jettisoned and we'd be playing, you know, with another part-time team somewhere. But to have been a small part of that journey, taking, you know, the Pars back into the Premier League, I'm happy to leave it at that. You know, I think the pride of being a wee part of that will never leave me.
Brilliant, mate. Superb. So then you go to Alloa. You have 2 years at Alloa before retiring. What was your spell like at Alloa Athletic?
Well, I went there because Gregor was there, Gregor Abel.
Right.
And when I'd said to Leash I was leaving, I had a chance to go to Falkirk or Wraith. Frank Connor was at Wraith at the time. And I remember Leash saying they're going to be competitors, and that really, I was aware of that, and I just thought, like, it's going to be really, really difficult playing against Dunfermline, and Gregor, I'd gotten very well with Gregor, and he said he would, you know, he wanted to bring me to Alloa, make me captain at Alloa. Just a wee funny point about that was, 2 or 3 years, I had played for Dunfermline for 10, 11 years. I had never had a signing on fee. I didn't know you got signing on fees. I used to go in to the manager's office, and the manager would be saying, right, we're going to, you'd go in and you'd think, am I getting another season, or am I out the door, or, you know, and then give you another year, give you another 2 years or whatever, sign. I would just sign. And I remember Jim Bowie coming out, can't remember who the manager was at the time, coming out and saying, oh, times must be hard, I've only got $1,000 as a signing on fee. I said, what? Signing on fee? I didn't know, I honestly didn't know that when you were in a club that you could get signing on fees for going on more seasons. So anyway, I'd never had anything. And then Gregor was going to take me to Alloa, and Dunfermline negotiated a fee. You know, it wasn't much.
$6,000 apart.
Is it $6,000?
Yeah.
Well, I wish I hadn't told everybody that. So anyway, so Gregor said, look, that's quite a lot of money for Alloa, and we will probably not be able to give you, you know, much in the way of a signing on fee. And I said, well, that's a wee bit disappointing, Gregor, because this is going to be my last move. I'm not going to go on anywhere else. He said, I'll tell you what we'll do. Our vice chairman is a managing director of Sterling Warehouse in Tillicoultry. And Linda and I had just we'd just bought a house, and he said, if you want to go along and choose something. So we went along, and we got a bed, a dining room suite with chairs and tables, bedroom furniture, and a settee. And that was my signing on fee from Sterling Warehouse. I've still got them. So, but so that was it. So anyway, I signed and played for 2 years, but I was the hamstring thing was really becoming a big issue then, and I think I played quite a bit in the first season, and then I had a bad hamstring tear again at the beginning of the next season. So played 2 seasons there, enjoyed it. I wasn't at my fittest, and I was beginning to, and I was travelling from here to Alloa Tuesday, Thursday training, so it was like an hour to get there. I sometimes couldn't get out of my surgery till 6 o'clock at night. The boys were already halfway through the training session, so it wasn't the greatest 2 years of my football career. And at the end of it, I remember going back for the 3rd season, and they were doing pre-season training, and with these young 17 and 18-year-old lads, just running away from me, and I thought, I'm just going to call it a day.
Yeah. Well, looking back on your career, over 400 appearances in professional football. So what would you say has been your proudest moment, if you could pick one?
The proudest thing was being captain of the team that got us back to the Premier League, really. So that tops everything.
Brilliant, mate. So fast forward a little bit, you mentioned it earlier, you then become the club doctor in 2007. So how did that come about? Were you kind of helping in the background anyway, or?
When I finished playing, I just had 5 years. I just didn't have anything. I suppose, it was, we had 3 kids in that period of time. Both my wife and I working full time, so I'd sort of drifted away from the football, and then I got 2 or 3. A friend of mine was the club doctor at Raith Rovers, and he would contact me on occasions and ask if I would help out if he couldn't do it. So I went down and I would help them out, and then he retired, and I was asked if I would be the club doctor at the Rovers. So I took that up, and that would be in the probably mid to late 90s. So Jimmy Nicholl, Peter Heatherston, John McVeigh.
You're talking about 97, I think, 98.
And latterly Claude and Nelka.
Yeah.
They were the managers. Gordon DL. So I was club doctor at Raith Rovers during that period. And that, I can't remember, that would take you into the 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s.
Yeah. And then I enjoyed that. But I remember, I remember sitting, because in those days the club doctor sat in the director's box, not pitch side. And I remember there was a game against Dunfermline at Kirkcaldy, and I think it was 3-3. It was a great game. It was quite a high scoring game, and it was impossible to react positively to a Raith Rovers goal, and equally impossible not to show any emotion.
Of course.
For a Dunfermline goal, you can't. Your team is always your team, and there's no way that I could. So anyway, at that time, my son, he was getting interested in the football, and I decided I'm going to give this up. So I gave it up, and I bought a couple of season tickets at East End, and Ali and I started going along to just to watch. And at that time, Jerry Gillespie was the club doctor, because he had followed Hugh, and Jerry was wanting to give it up. That was at the end of Jimmy Calderwood's time. Stephen Kenny had become manager, and Leash contacted me and said, would you like to come back? And And you know, of course, I leapt at it. And it was a slightly bittersweet thing at the start, I must say, because my son Ali and I, you know, we were going along home and away to all the Pars matches. And he was a right wee fanatic. And I remember, you know, it was great taking him to that Scottish Cup final, you know, and he couldn't believe it. You know, we came away and we'd lost, and he said, you know, I was devastated. He said, never mind, Dad, next year, we'll do it next year. And he didn't quite appreciate Dunfermline don't get to the cup final every year. And when I took the job, that was, as I say, a little bit bittersweet, because being a fan, you know, I think people maybe find this strange, but for me, being a fan trumps all. Mm-hmm. I think being a fan has given me, you know, as much pride and joy as being a player, as being or being a doctor. It's great being a fan. You get emotionally so involved. When you're playing, you're focused on doing a job. When you're a club doctor, you're worried about what's happening.
You can't really enjoy it in the positions, can you?
You can't.
So focused.
It's different. Saying. Being a fan is brilliant.
Yeah.
And I love being a fan. And I loved that period with my son. You know, we'd go along. And when I became doctor, that broke a little bit, because I had to be in the dressing room and I had to be pitch side, and Ali and I weren't watching it together. Yeah. And in a way, you know, I look back upon that with a bit of regret, because he's drifted away from the football a bit now. Anyway, that was something we shared, you know, for a period of time. So I became doctor when Stephen Kenny was there, which was really interesting, because when I was quite disappointed really when I worked at Wraith, to think, you know, it's 20 years or so since I've played, and the sports science, the nutrition, the physiotherapy has not moved on. It's still where it was in Scotland. Yeah. And I knew it wasn't like that, you know, in England, but we hadn't really moved it on. And when I got into Dunfermline with Stephen Kenny, I know that there are, you know, differing opinions about Stephen, but he really introduced some revolutionary ideas in sport, you know, first sports scientist at East End, I think, and his training, you know, techniques and you know, the nutrition.
Did he not start introducing ice baths for the first time as well?
Ice baths were introduced. So there was a lot of new things came. We had a physio there at the time, Jerry Docherty, and Jerry and I became very close friends. And I would credit Jerry with my subsequent sort of desire to improve myself as a sports medicine doctor, because he was being a medic. Traditionally in the football clubs meant you'd stitch people up, you'd administer paracetamol or antibiotics or whatever, but it had moved on, and sports medicine was becoming a much more vital part of, you know, progressive clubs, knowing what, you know, these little advantages, you know, could bring to performance. So Jerry was, you know, he was a top physio, and so as not to embarrass myself, I decided I would do a sports medicine master's course. Right. So I enrolled at Bath University and did that. So I did that quite early on in my time at Dunfermline, so that I could communicate on an equal level with Jerry, really. So I felt that was I really enjoyed that. You know, it was 2 or 3 years of intense learning, and you know, my sort of sports medicine knowledge, you know, hit an upward trajectory, and we worked very well together. And then subsequently, the other physio that came in, Kenny Murray, once Jerry had left. So I worked with 2 really good physios.
Yeah.
And then so had Stephen. Then worked under Jim Jeffries, then worked under Jim McIntyre and Alan Johnson. Yeah. So I was there for 10 years.
Who was the best out of all them to work for? Can you answer that one?
I honestly couldn't say a bad word about any of them, but I had a really good relationship with Jim McIntyre, and we had a particularly successful time.
Yeah, promotion winning season, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Alan Johnson treated me so well. He was, always respectful when I called the shots on something. That there are some sometimes confrontations in a way, between the medical side and the playing side, and that there was at the time I was doctor, that they were beginning to recognise, in a practical sense, the risk of head injury and head knocks. And, if a player, there was one particular instance that unnerved me a wee bit, and we had a player, I'll not go into details of it, but he was knocked out just 2 or 3 minutes before half time, and you could see when he went down, he was unconscious.
Yeah.
And by the time we got onto the pitch, this match was being televised. By the time we got onto the pitch, he was coming round, and we took him off. I assessed him at half time. Clearly, and I said, you can't go back on. And then I went off and had a cup of tea. And then when I went back out to see the second half, he was on the pitch. So the manager had put him back on. And I think that I don't want to be critical of the manager in that sense, because that's what happened then. The manager called the shots, and of course they're not going to be as aware of the potential risks or something like that. But a season or two after that, the SFA changed the rules so that the doctor has to give permission to the referee that a player can go back on the pitch.
Yeah.
So that changed things.
You can see that now in the game with any head injuries.
Absolutely. And you see two
strict.
People on right away.
Yeah.
I think in my time, that has been really, really good, and that never existed. I mean, you were very much, as the club doctor, you were very much just another member of the backroom staff, and your opinion was listened to, but not necessarily acted upon.
Yeah. What was the worst injury you had to attend to?
I was lucky, actually. I had a couple of wee sort of broken legs that weren't that bad. The worst injuries are always when people are unconscious. So yeah, I had a couple of those. I never had anything that resulted in any major problem. I had lots of pretty hairy stitch jobs to do to try and maintain the looks of some some young guys. But no, I was lucky. I never had anything that led to any serious long-term consequences.
Yeah. So you served as club doctor for 10 years.
Yeah.
And during that time, you get inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
What was that moment like for you?
Oh, surreal, really. I mean, just you sort of when you're a fan of a club, something like that just probably assumes a greater significance in your life. So I was very proud, and I was particularly proud that my two best mates at the club, Hugh White and Bonner Mercer, had been involved in, I think, put my name forward or something.
Yeah.
It was a funny night, and I remember going there, and John Watson was being inducted the same night, and John was as nervous as anything because he thought he had to do a speech, and he'd phoned me. John Watson has had my mobile phone number forever for all these medical issues. I've been his doctor so you're on the phone, doc, can you help me out here? So anyway, he phoned me up, and he said, I'm terrified, we'll have to do a speech. What have you written? And I said, well, I haven't written anything, John. He said, no, we'll need to do a speech. It'll be terrifying. What are you going to say? And I said, I don't know, I haven't thought about it. So anyway, come the night, he came over to my table and he said, where's your speech? And I said, well, I haven't written anything, John. He said, look, what do you think of this? And he had about 5 pages of A4, all these things. Yeah. I said, I don't think it's necessary that you have to do that. So anyway, Leash, of course, does all the presentations, and Leash won't let you get a word in edgeways. Yeah. So Leash, inducted John in, said his thing, and John got in, and he was absolutely furious because he spent weeks writing this 4-page long speech and he never got to utter a word.
Superb.
But it was a great night, yeah, and my Hall of Fame stars and pride of place in the living room.
Superb, mate. And obviously, you're a member of the Former Players Association, so what's it like being part of that and meet up with the guys like Bonner and Chris and all the guys that go to the games?
It's great. I mean, Chris does a fantastic job, a great job. And when I was, doctor, I would often pop up, just before the game, and I would always be told if somebody was coming along, that played with me. So I would always nip along and see them, but I never had time to get involved. But since finishing up as doctor, I go along regularly, and it's great. You see the same old faces most weeks, but then there's always 1 or 2 guys, who appear for maybe 1 or 2 games a season. Football friendships last forever, and they never age. You are immediately, back in the 70s or the 80s, not sort of, being modelling and talking about how great things were then, but just there's a bond between guys that shared things like that. And of all the friendships I've made in my life, professionally, I'm still most at ease and have most fun with my old football pals.
Brilliant. You attend most home games at Eastend. What's your thoughts on football today? And do you think you could have played in the games today?
Well, there's a much more of a attention giving to I think fitness levels now, and there's a whole body fitness. The guys clearly get, which is long overdue, I think, get trained physiologically. They look at improving parameters, their cardiovascular fitness. They get trained, and as they should. A centre half gets different training from a striker. We all got the same stuff. You went out and you got hammered cardiovascularly. You did very little resistance training. So the guys now are much fitter. I think they are fitter for their roles specifically as well. So I think that level, I think I could have done that. That fitness for me was, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed training, and I would have loved the opportunity to have been, trained more scientifically, and I would have pushed myself. So my fitness levels would have been fine. I always have a great difficulty in comparing skill levels because they're playing on bowling greens now. You remember the parks we used to play on?
Yeah. Lucky if there was any grass on it.
Oh, I mean, East End never had any grass after December. You played, through the winter when the pitches were bone hard. You still played. I've still got scars on my knees and things from where you would slide tackle on a bone hard pitch and just rip the skin off your knees. So that aspect of things, they play on beautiful pitches, they're much fitter. I think it's difficult to compare like with like. But no, there are some, I think, some guys who are playing for, Dunfermline now who would have, graced the best of the teams that I played with.
Yeah. Brilliant, mate. So just rounding up your career in the game, what's been the most surreal moment would you say, playing football? Or even your experience as a club doctor?
Well, I would think, and this is didn't have much of a role in the game, I suppose, but played in the same pitch as George Best.
Right.
So we back in 70 or 80 maybe?
October 80.
80, when Hibs came to East End. And I remember shaking George's hand, and he said, "Hello, I'm George." And I said, "Yes, I know who you are." And he, at that time, I ran the players' bar, and we had I used to raise funds for at that time there was a wee girl patient of mine, and she was was raising funds for her. She had cystic fibrosis, raising funds for her to go to Disney World. And so George came into the players' bar afterwards, and I explained to him what we did, because he was going to buy his pint. I said, no, you just make a donation. And I said, I'm a doctor, and we raise funds. I'm raising funds for a wee girl to go to Disney World. And George handed over two £50 notes, had a Coke,
Wow.
and then went off to Edinburgh Airport and flew down to London, because he used to just come up,
Yeah.
So playing, being able to be on the same football pitch as George Best.
Amazing experience.
Fabulous. Yeah.
What about any regrets?
None on the football side. I think I made the right choices for me. I wish I had gone into sports medicine at an earlier time. I sort of drifted out the game for a while, and then came back to the Rovers, but it was really just helping out. I really wish I had developed my interest in sports medicine when I finished playing. I had no interest in coaching. I did coaching badges and things, but that wasn't for me. But yeah, I wish I'd done that.
Brilliant. What about memorabilia? Were you one for collecting? And if so, is there like one item that you really treasure?
No, I've got a couple of football strips, and I've got my medals, which I've got 3 medals, so I'll give one to each of my kids. These are promotion medals. And I have got my Hall of Fame star.
Yeah.
But
nice.
That's it.
It's good items, to be fair. What about your toughest opponent?
I mentioned Pat Nevin. Mm-hmm. He sticks out. And another guy who's maybe not the leap to anyone's mind was, but I remember the Aberdeen team, and Peter Weir played wide left, and he was just a rocket. And yeah, he was a flying machine. So, but Nevin would get it. Nevin, I couldn't play him.
Yeah.
He was great.
Brilliant. Best teammate? Who was your best mate in football? If you could pick one. Or a few, to be fair.
My 2 best mates in football, probably my 2 best mates in life, are Hugh White and Bonner Mercer. And we were 1, 2 and 3 at East End for a while. And we used to, Hugh was a mentor to me. The 3 of us used to travel through together from Edinburgh. And Bonner has been my longest friend in life, really. We're still very close. He'd do anything. He's the sort of guy who would do anything for you.
Yeah. So good guy. Perfect, mate. And then final question, how do you reflect back on your career in football? How would you sum it up?
I would say that I played with my heart. I played with, passion for the team that I loved. I fully appreciated my limitations. I played, within these limitations, but I think I got the most out of what I had, I would say. So, no regrets.
Brilliant. Bobby, it's been great catching up, and thanks for reminiscing and telling us about your career in football.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Mikey. I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would.
Good man. Perfect. Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you for listening.
Remember to subscribe to this podcast, which is available on all popular platforms such as Apple iTunes, Spotify and Google Podcasts. Thanks to our guest in this episode of Walking Down the Halbeath Road. This podcast was produced by Jan Motkiewicz and music supplied by Stuart Dusty Miller. We look forward to speaking to another former par in the next episode.